Hello and welcome to the Core Preservation Week webinar, Networking Strategies Improve Disaster Readiness. I'm Brianna Gormley and I'm a member of the Core Preservation Outreach Committee. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Steve Pine. Steve worked as the conservator at MFA Houston for 32 years. He is president and a founding member of the Texas Collections Emergency Resource Alliance, or Texera. As a member of the American Institute for Conservation, AIC, he served as the chair of the Wood and Artifacts Group and of the Emergency Committee. He's an active member of the National Heritage Response Team of the Foundation for the Advancement in Conservation. Steve is deployed as part of these groups following Hurricanes Katrina, Ike, Sandy, and Harvey. In 2018, he was awarded the AIC's President's Award for his leadership assisting cultural heritage institutions damaged in the Houston area following Hurricane Harvey. He lectures and leads workshops on disaster preparedness and response for cultural heritage resources and on building alliance response networks. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise. You can utilize the Zoom chat function to comment or communicate with other attendees, but please use the Q&A box if you have any questions for a presenter or if you need technical support. We can only minimally monitor the chat. Our primary focus will be to monitor the Q&A, and we will have time to answer questions after the presentation. You may comment on today's presentation using Twitter, and the hashtag is CORECE2023. We do not monitor the Twitter feed during the presentation, so again, please add all your questions for the presenter to the Q&A. The webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. CORE is committed to providing a harassment-free environment for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, physical appearance, ethnicity, religion, or other group identity. To that extent, all webinar participants, including speakers and attendees, must comply with the CORE Statement of Conduct. I will drop the link into the chat now. Please contact me through private chat or email jreese@ala.org if you experience or witness any violations of the code. And now I will hand it over to Steve.
Well, thank you, Brianna. Let me share the screen and I'll begin my presentation. Just a moment. Okay, I'm going to let's see, exit so I can get back to the beginning of that. Pardon me. Okay, and show. Apologize. I did have this set up, and that's what I get for checking. After we did all of our tests. Okay, so let me get back to the Zoom screen. Anna, I think I think I caused myself a little trouble. Okay, now I'm back. Apologize for that. Okay. Now the screen should be up, and I can see that. Brianna, can you see it as well?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, sorry for that disruption. After all the practice, and I still managed to click on the wrong screen. So today I'd like to be able to make a pitch for joining other professionals in efforts to create a network where you are for an increased capacity to respond to disasters should they strike. What I found in the past is that there's so many people that are interested in preservation from different angles, that limiting ourselves to just our own specialty area is probably a disservice to ourselves and to our communities. So when I get a chance to speak with folks about networking and in particular the Alliance for Response uh, 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 programs, what I find is that people are excited about the possibility of learning new skills from other folks and sharing their expertise in a way that's meaningful and is added value in the long run for you working at your institution, and increases confidence in a response, but then also is a way of being able to extend power and the capacity for you to respond should something become a problem. And the Alliance for Response Network, which I'm a member of, currently has 23 networks spread across the country. They're not represented in all states, but they grow each year. And it's it's a program that's been run by the American Institute for Conservation, and it's very conservation heavy, but it's not limited to conservators. The networks in general are for assisting museums, libraries, archives, historical properties, and sites. If you're looking for a connection to Alliance for Response Network, I've got some information there for you on the screen. Now, the Texas version of that is something that we worked very hard at growing over the years. The group of folks that have been putting energy into that are amazing, and we've been training other uh, cultural heritage specialists in all sorts of professions that want to be more skilled, more informed, and be available to help should any of our partners be challenged in a way that surprised them and overwhelmed their capacity to respond. Now, the Resource Alliance is something that is always volunteer. Our group is in particular has grown enough that we've become a 501c3 organization, so that we can have a little bit of connectivity and activity that is a little bit more productive than just the original volunteer network. Now, what I'd like to do is try to give a sense of what options there are and what kind of challenges there might be as we try to consider now, okay, how might we apply that? In what circumstances, what might we have a need for an extended network beyond our own institution? Now, how do you respond when even your best plans and resources are overwhelmed? I mean, it happens in every part of our state and every state in the country. There are things that just are a surprise, whether they're natural disasters or problems that are commercial or institutional. But the difference that we have to focus on here is an emergency is an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. So emergencies happen. Your capacity to respond is what we're trying to strengthen. And a serious problem over a short or long period of time that threatens extensive loss, which exceeds the ability of the affected community to cope using its own resources, defines a disaster. And I'm going to share 3 case studies that look at it from different perspectives. There are three different kinds of cultural communities that were impacted. And I want to give a sense of what kind of networks we were able to put together, having established certain lines of communication prior to the disasters, so that having put in the legwork and made the relationships, established relationships before the disasters, facilitated an effective and cogent response. So our first example is going to be the severe freeze damages that occurred at the Texas Hall of State in February of 2021. And the partners in response for that were specific to the Dallas area, but broader than that as well. There was and by way of example, I love that this was so diverse a group. We had the mayor's office in the city of Dallas with their Office of Arts and Culture, the Dallas Historical Society, which was tasked with maintaining and being the managers of the collections there. A disaster recovery company, Belfour in particular, Phoenix One, which was a contractor that had recently worked on the Hall of State and was very familiar with all the materials that were there. There was Texera, of course, and the Texas Historical Commission. I'm going to share with you a short video that describes it and the event pretty well, and some of the components of the response, which I think will be helpful in examining this kind of option.
About 4 o'clock in the morning, we received a water flow sensor. It took me about 15 minutes to get on site. There was water coming out of the front doors. I entered in through our admin entrance where there was already water downstairs. Made my way up here. Essentially all of our sprinklers had busted. One would burst, hit another one, it would burst. Daisy chained a bunch of pipes together, and all of the water was rushing downstairs, out of the doors, and any egress that it could find.
Right.
It's coming from above and the side.
Right. It's coming from every direction.
Yeah. I mean, apart from, Shelley Winters and there's got to be a morning after, I mean, it's the Poseidon Adventure.
It was dumping water in the archives of the Dallas Historical Society, which contains not only our centennial documentation for this building and the centennial exhibition. Right now we're trying to dry out Quanah Parker's pipe bag. So it's not just the beautiful building that we've worked so hard on, but also part of the collection from the Historical Society that is important to Dallas and Texas history. The oratones received a lot of water in the walls, behind the walls. So we have a makeshift plan with Texera, the emergency response team for the American Institute of Conservation, to help triage all of the art and cultural objects that are here.
Basically, the entire first floor had a minimum of an inch and a half of water in every single room, every closet. The building's very flat. It's pretty amazing, actually. Water had got into every room, cardboard boxes, damaged a whole lot of ceiling tile. There was probably 2 or 3 inches in the basement. Toby opened up the auditorium doors, and that allowed a lot of the water that was accumulating on the second floor to at least go downhill towards the stage. About 4.5 feet of water in the sub-basement. The power company came and turned the power off, and everybody was really worried about electrocution. Obviously, a full building live, and electrical panels filling with water. We do have power back to the building now. We were able to drive the main panels out. Got power on about 6:30, 7 o'clock yesterday evening. We've got 20-something dehumidifiers going in the building currently and fans. All the woodwork in this adjacent room, it's already beginning to swell. There was obviously water coming inside the walls and leaking out at intersections and what have you. That ceiling that we just beautiful ceiling in the Hall of Heroes, obviously we lost some large chunks of it. There's a tremendous amount of damage on that ceiling. It's going to take some interesting forensics to figure out how much is salvageable and what type of repairs and what structural issues are up there. We know what most of the materials are now. We just finished painting and silver leafing and things like that. So we have the men and the crews. We just have to do analysis now of what needs to be done. It's going to take a long time to assess it.
Okay. Okay. This building was built as a symbol of Texas. And Texas is hurting today. And so is this building. We have a good team here, a knowledgeable team. Fortunately, we have volunteer conservationists who are simply triaging for us so we can figure out where are our highest priorities.
Oh man, look at that.
The whole building is a work of art. It's both in the walls and it is the wall. Much of this building contains symbols related to the history of Texas. You will see carvings, you will see photographs, you will see murals, all that relate to the history of Texas. And those all will need to be assessed.
We discovered damage from the water runs. The water in the sprinkler system is dirty. You get rust, you get other materials that stain the surface. So we don't know if the moisture has from the wall has etched the paint film. We don't know if those runs are permanent or they can be reformed.
I am thankful that the conservators who are here, as I say, are very experienced, and they've been through things like hurricanes and other similar circumstances.
You know, in what is considered a worst case scenario with what happened, this is probably the best outcome we could have had. We were on it within 4 hours. We had 40 people here. All the water was extracted from the building. It's pretty amazing what was done in that short period of time, because it could have been a whole lot worse.
For my second case study, I'd like to approach a project that was in Kentucky, and that the National Heritage Responders, of which I'm one, and there are several that are part of our Alliance for Response group here in Texas, will sometimes take part in. And I was part of a team that went to apply these same principles and skill sets to a flood that occurred in Whitesburg, Kentucky in July of 2022. Now, the National Heritage Responders are a part of the FAIC, AIC, and they were, some of this work was funded, underwritten by the National Endowment for the Humanities. I want to recognize that there definitely is a broad system of support that's out there in the country that just needs to be identified and linked to in order to be able to make some pretty amazing things happen. Now, on this graph, it may not be extremely clear, but the peak there was over a period of a day and a half, where the river there at the city of Whitesburg peaked at slightly over 9 feet above flood stage. And top left over here is a view of what the city looks like, and the river that flows down through between the mountains there just swelled beyond belief, and the city was inundated. And the building at the top right is the one of concern for this particular deployment and effort, in that as the city tried to cope with the personal needs and the business needs of recovery after such a tragic event, the building that's up in the top there is the headquarters for a group that is actually the repository of most of the cultural history of this region of the country. The Apple Shop building itself housed an auditorium. They had a radio station there. They have an archives and storage are all severely damaged. This is the view of it after the water started to recede. And they did what they could do, and they made an amazing amount of progress within the first few weeks after the flood. But the volunteers worked around the clock, and they had people coming from far afield, from universities and more in the community, even though there were some people that had lost their homes as well, which is always a challenge. And one of the reasons that we try to have as broad a network as possible when it comes to preparing for events, because we're often overwhelmed ourselves. And it's hard to be able to dedicate the kind of resources, whether manpower or supplies, under circumstances like this. So the Apple Shop administrators had contacted the American Institute for Conservation and the National Heritage Responders to see if there would be the option of sending a team there to help them with the next stage of their recovery, which was to clean up to 5,000 audio reels, create an assessment report, and make recommendations for future actions. So you can see in this image how we're trying to work with very moldy, still damp in many cases, weeks after the event, materials that were going to become even further damaged and perhaps unrecoverable if there was not a plan and some intervention. So the deployment team and Apple Shop staff reviewed the remaining collection materials that were still on site. Many materials were put in freezer trucks that could be taken away so that those issues could be addressed by professionals dealing with library and archive materials. And then there were these other materials that did not fall into that group and still needed attention. There are historical recordings of performances and interviews and oral histories documenting the life of rural Kentucky coal communities for decades, and they were in danger of being lost. What we did in a practical way was work with some of the reels, try to clean as many of those as we could using HEPA vacuum and a brush, so that they'd be prepared for some mild wet cleaning and be stabilized at least somewhat, so that they could wait their turn to be dealt with in a more professional and thorough manner. Here's an example of what we were able to accomplish. This is before and after treatment for a 1/4-inch audio tape and reel. But we didn't really have the number of hands to be able to do all of those reels at that time. So we expanded our mission to include doing a full assessment of the remaining collections materials, so that we could generate a report that could be used to guide future conservation efforts and support additional grant applications. What we were able to accomplish was nearly 500 of those audio reels were stabilized for additional cleaning. But what I found to be the added benefit of working with their staff was, now that we worked with their staff, we trained them to be able to then continue that cleaning effort with their local volunteers, so that we were training the trainers and training the staff that would continue the effort beyond the 3 days that we were able to spend there on site. So that was the second of the 3 case studies that I'd like to share. There's another one that happened here in Houston that was right at the end of December this past year. The Winter Street Artist Studios had a fire and soot damage problem that occurred at the Sawyer Yards. And I'm highlighting this project because it was unusual for several reasons, in that it was not an institution but a collection of artists, and it engaged parts of our Houston community that were not always in a position to collaborate. But it's a great example of how, if your organization is flexible and open to new relationships and collaborations, how effective your response can be. Now, the Sawyer Yards is a vibrant community. It had over 400 studios and galleries located under several buildings near the city center and rehabilitated industrial buildings. On December 24th, arson occurred at the Winter Street Studios. It was one of the older of the buildings that were there, and you can see the kind of damage that happened. There was an explosion of gasoline containers that were set up at this one studio, and it blew out the doors to it and caught fire in that end of the building, and heat and smoke just billowed through the rest of the building. In the bottom image, you can see some of the damage in that particular studio, and it was contained to one end of the building, at least the explosion component. But what ended up being the biggest concern for the remaining artists and their studios was the amount of smoke and soot that was deposited throughout the rest of the building. here's their legend for where all the galleries and studios were located. And some people have been working in those studios for decades. They had others have used those studios as a office or for holding classes for performing arts in addition to visual arts. So it was this quite diverse set of people and set of needs. And the partners in this response for the Winter Street Studios were Fresh Arts, which is a local arts-based advocate in the Houston area, the Houston Arts Alliance, which was the lead for much of what happened in the response, is a group that works closely with the mayor's office of cultural affairs to be a advocate and a sponsor of arts programming throughout the city, and they were essential to this focused response. Texera had been working with the Houston Arts Alliance for a couple of years on various projects, so it was a natural, easy teaming of our groups to be able to come up with an effective response. And because we're a 501c3, we have also had connections to the Texas VOAD. And if you're not familiar with what VOADs are, they're volunteer organizations active in disaster. Think Red Cross and the Salvation Army and food groups that would come in after a disaster and try to provide support for those impacted by the disaster, but also for sometimes for the responders. And the National Heritage Responders, since we're connected with the Alliance for Response, we're able to come in and provide some programming and some technical support as well. And see that I added this slide to remind myself to note that the Houston Arts Alliance does have an ongoing disaster resilience program that they've been active in for several years since Hurricane Harvey hit. So that's an ongoing program, and it's the reason that we were connected to begin with. And they brought a lot of great expertise and energy to supporting the artists from many different aspects of the response. So our groups were tasked to provide, at least the Texera component, the Alliance for Response was tasked to conduct an assessment of the damage and recommend a plan for recovery that then could be used by the Houston Arts Alliance and Fresh Arts to advocate to the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs for and the VOAD groups to be able to get resources of many types, supplies, donations, and find a means to be able to support the artists who, in some cases, this was their means of livelihood that was taken from them, and they just had no way of earning money even for the rent of their studio until they were back on their feet. So we worked with these groups to identify and share strategies with the artists and recovery team with the goal of mitigating further loss and aiding recovery. We gathered and distributed personal protective equipment and trained the artists to safely work in soot contaminated spaces as they tried to affect the recovery of the things that were not seriously damaged but were still perhaps reclaimable. And we shared art conservation expertise in soot remediation for a wide range of art materials. I believe that we probably covered just about every type of material that could be used in art within that that group, and it was quite a challenge to be able to provide them with the kind of information that they needed specific to their particular range of artwork. So to share with you what that recovery and what those visits were like and what the extent of damage was, I'll show a few slides now that will show how the soot going up and the smoke billowing up the hallways got everywhere. There was always air vents, and in some cases, many cases, there were fans over top of each door, so that as the smoke and soot came down the hallways, it was able to get into every one of the studios. Even folks that thought that they were only lightly damaged or didn't have soot at all, once we made a close inspection, found that there was this oily, carbon-rich mass of little particles that were deposited over all the artwork and all of the supplies. In this photo here, one of the artists had already removed everything from their studio, and you can see that there were some boxes and some things that were on the floor when the damage occurred, and those are the light areas which show the epoxy covering on the floor. But all that dark matter there is the soot that came in and just settled on every horizontal surface. Even the walls have some witness marks of whatever was hung on the wall didn't get quite as much soot deposit as the rest of surrounding surfaces. Now, over those first several days and into the next few weeks, artists had already started clearing their studios. Some had was just started tossing everything in the bins, in the trash bins that were outside, which was unfortunate because some things were capable of being cleaned. But I think in the dismay that they felt and the overwhelming, scale of the damage, they sometimes were a little hasty to just toss things out. But our team tried to work with those artists to interviewed the ones that were still there and examined their artwork and tried to come up with a strategy for them that would maximize their return on their efforts. Not everything could be treated to the point where the artwork was capable of being reclaimed and sold, but many things were. So that was the majority of our efforts for the first couple of weeks. We had conservators, collections managers, library specialists, and a range of folks that could come in and apply their skill set and their background to answering the questions and helping the artists feel like they had a foundation that they could build on, a roadmap for proceeding. And through these interviews, and we were able to then identify what kind of resources we could get them and supply and train them to use so that they could maximize their return. There were loads and loads of donated materials that we're able to help get to those artists in need. There were cleaning supplies. There was personal protective equipment to keep them safe while they were dealing with all the soot. And those efforts were a boon to the artists because they really had very little resource to be able to go out and get these things. We could give them a list of things to get, but we really relied on the Houston Arts Alliance and some of our VOAD partners who were able to donate Tyvek suits and masks and gloves and some of the things that the artists needed right away and needed every day and every week while they tried to complete their cleanup. And in addition, what we did was we found it was really productive to set up a Facebook group to be able to exchange information and answer questions readily that the artists could get information back and forth from Texera and HAA, so that as issues came up, we could identify the problems and try to solve some of the problems that were logistical, that were concerns about the how to manage the next steps, where they would be able to take their artwork to temporarily while cleanup continued. There are all sorts of benefits to being able to open up a dialogue there. And in this particular case, Facebook turned out to be a wonderful way of being able to keep those lines of communication open and make them more immediate. Those were monitored every day, and the dialogues were great. And what we also found out and were able to facilitate was putting together some workshops with connecting the artists to conservators in different specialty areas that could answer their questions, show them some materials and techniques that might be able to help them in their cleanup. So we had a series of 3 workshops held over 2 weeks where conservators answered their questions and instructed them in safe and effective techniques for soot removal. This is a photo of some of our team on the left, and there were some volunteer art conservators in the area, Witten and Proctor, that were painting specialists that were very, very generous with their time, both at Facebook and in our workshops, to help as many of the artists as we could. Here's an example of showing them some of the dry cleaning techniques that were discussed and demonstrated. And in a separate workshop, we talked about what they might be able to do safely on their own in the way of wet cleaning, but very often it's more complicated and best left to conservators. But getting them, the artists, to recognize which they could do safely and which they should save and ask for help from a professional was quite appropriate. And all the while that this was going on with the conservators helping the artists directly, HAA was fundraising, getting materials and asking for funds. And with the addition of the City of Houston's $250,000 donation of financial support for the artists, over $300,000 was dedicated to just dispersing evenly to all the artists that were impacted, so that they would have some means of being able to get supplies and get themselves back on their feet and start making art again, which more often than not was their first priority. They were concerned about what they lost, but they were as concerned with or more with just getting back on with the process of making art, because that's what that was their true passion. So this is my last pitch for networking. I think that there's such a great wealth of information in your organization. The things that you have on your website that help identify and prepare organizations and professionals in the library arts is incredible. It's been decades in the making. You have a huge amount of expertise, but I advocate that individual institutions, individual libraries and professionals sometimes are still perhaps left to their own devices if they're not engaged with some larger assembly of allies. And that's why I advocate for Alliance for Response type networks, if not the Alliance for Response itself, that can be a great resource for specific response and making you stronger and your skill set stronger, but then also giving you the depth and the range to be able to respond to when an emergency becomes a disaster. And I've listed a few potential allies that we've found are always interested. It may take a little bit of work to be able to get a great connection with them, but the more you try and the more you volunteer helping other groups, the more those groups are likely to connect with you. Some are like the VOADs and the local government Office of Emergency Management are there to help the broad community, and they're sometimes slow to take up the needs of the cultural heritage community, museums, libraries, and archives, but they do care and they will engage if you approach them. The VOADs that are a super organization that is generous beyond means. It's incredible. So do check those out. There are state and national VOAD groups. HENTEF, which you're already ALA is already a valued contributor to, is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. They do coordinate, they have discussions, they facilitate. Keep them in mind when you're thinking of what your needs might be and who you might call on for assistance. As with the National Heritage Responders at the AIC and the HEART program at the Smithsonian does training and outreach as well. And the archivists are another group that I found to be very easy to engage and work with, and just don't leave any group by the way as you're looking to extend yourselves and develop a network. So this is a sampling of potential allies. You don't have to write it all down. It's embedded in the slides, and you'll also see it added to the chat room. So that those are links that are active. I checked them all. But as far as the Mayor's Office for Cultural Affairs, most at the bottom there, and the state offices of emergency management, you will have to do a little digging to see what's available in your office. I mean, in your state, in your locality. So that completes the presentation, and I think we have some time for Q&A. If Brianna, would you like to jump back in?
Sure, and thank you, Steve, so much for that really interesting presentation. And yeah, we do have time for questions. Just a reminder to drop those into the Q&A box. I don't see any yet here. Let's see, there was one asking for that video that you showed, but Ian answered that. Thank you. Yeah, so please drop those into the Q&A. I will see if there's anything in chat as well. Let's see, there is one in chat here asking, do you have any advice for establishing these networking groups in states or regions that have fewer public resources or private companies working in preservation?
But yes. I think that you just cast the net a bit more broadly, that universities, libraries, the museums, archives, may not be very dense in some more rural areas. But I think that when we look at extending it to counties, and to a entire state like Texera, it has a lot of ground to cover, and we don't cover, we can't possibly, but we network with the major cities and the major institutions in the state, and thereby have a means to be able to reach out and be supportive to folks along the coast or people in the panhandle that may not be able to organize their own group, but join a group. They're find somebody that's close. There's always an interest on the part of the American Institute for Conservation and the Alliance for Response programs to start groups. So contact them if you think that there might be a critical mass of 3, 5, people that have a similar interest, then that's a starting point. Texera started out with 3 to 5 of us that talked about it, talked about the need, recognized the need, and wondered how we might be able to do more. And the more we talked and the more we presented at annual conferences for museums and regional groups, that people recognized that they would like to help and they would like to join. So the group's been growing. But don't be put off by there being, seeming like you'd have to do it all yourselves. That there's a template and there's a kit the way they refer to it for the Alliance for Response group that will assist, and they'll bring in people to present to your in your forum and your kickoff meeting that would help jumpstart the group and be there to advise in the future. So don't be hesitant. If you can join a group, do. If you don't have a group to join, then reach out to the Alliance for Response at AIC and see if you can start one.
Thanks. There's another question here from somebody who helped form a statewide response community in the mid-2000s, but it's since dissolved when they lost funding. Do you have suggestions for keeping systems or funding to help them stay long-term?
That's always a challenge, and we've been Texera in particular, and I think many of the groups across the nation that are part of the Alliance for Response are completely volunteer, or they're attached to an emergency management organization or a city or state organization that can underwrite some of the expenses. But Texera has done it for the most part without any funding. We just volunteer to talk together. The funding that we do get is minimal. That will be donations or from programming that we put on, where we might charge a minimal fee of $30, $40 for participants to take part in. And it's I think information sharing is what it's about for the most part, and you build on that. So you create dialogues, you get involved in conversations and find out who your allies are, and build on that. But you can do a lot without a budget.
I don't see any more questions right now, so please feel free to keep adding those questions to the Q&A box. I guess while we wait to see if any other questions come in, I'll ask a question. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more. I know that in several of the case studies you mentioned facilitating trainings. If you have advice or existing resources or resources you created for setting up those trainings, kind of responding in the moment to a disaster.
Well, the Smithsonian's Heart Program is open to everyone across the country for one. So that's a natural, and they've had a hiatus during COVID, but they've returned to having training courses uh, that are complete. Now that's one route. The other is FEMA offers CERT courses for civilians for emergency response teams, and just learning to be capable of operating in an emergency within your community covers a lot of the same ground. It isn't technical expertise in dealing with books or manuscripts or collections, but half of our training is learning to operate it in a challenging environment where there's a problem, there's an overwhelming emergency and disaster that creates a certain kind of dynamic that requires an awareness of a situational awareness of how to keep yourself safe while you're trying to help someone else, so that's accessible in almost every community. And going to look at either state or FEMA training for such a thing. It's surprising how many really good, valuable courses are free and accessible to the public. So that's another route.
Do you see one more question now? I think this is all we'll have time for. Do you have any advice or resources on how a local government's records center or archives could start on preparing a disaster recovery plan?
Certainly, I think that there's several formats for creating disaster plans for institutions, and some are more heavily focused on documents. And if you look at the Northeast Document uh, Conservation Center programming, and there's a D plan that's been revamped. That is a template. There's several. I can add some resources for that, but the American Institute for Conservation's website has several examples, and will, if you go to their website and look up emergencies or disaster planning, there'll be many resources that are there, and they'll also connect to other organizations like Texera. Texera's website or our Facebook group also lists a lot of those same resources that is available to just about anyone. So it doesn't take much digging to be able to find a template. You start with a template, and there are collecting to conservation C2C webinars that are available through the American Institute for Conservation that cover exactly that. That you can go through a listing of what's on the YouTube channel for the American Institute for Conservation and find many examples of answering, of ways of developing that kind of program, that kind of plan.
Thanks again for all of that. Really useful information will again be in the slides and in the recording that everyone will receive in an email after this. Since we are coming up on the end of our time, I just want to again thank Steve, our presenter today, for this really great presentation. Everyone will receive also an evaluation form along with the slides and recording in that email. It's really helpful if you can fill that out to help the core education, continuing education committee plan future events. Thank you also to the members of the continuing education committee, our technical support, Lisa Lorenzo, to Mia Blick-Sheehan, Tom Farron, Julie Reese from the core office. The support they provide makes it possible for us to present these webinars. And ALA Core is seeking new members, so join Core for access to past webinars and many other benefits. Visit ala.org/core for more information on membership. Other continuing education events coming up. The next webinar will be Servant Leadership Principles Applied Practically on May 9th. So see the core website to register if you're interested in that. The core offers web courses as well. The next two will be Fundamentals of Acquisitions and Fundamentals of Electronic Resource Acquisitions. Other opportunities from core include the next e-forum, which will be Slow Librarianship, a community of practice, and the next core classroom will be Building Our Strengths Together. So again, you can check the website for more information on all of these continuing education events. And thank you again so much for attending the webinar today. This concludes our Preservation Week webinar.
Thank you.